and that's why I chose that name. And at that time, they kept saying that my pregnancy levels were still really high, and they would go down eventually. And that was right before Christmas. Basically, so from the time, what ended up happening is that from the time that I had that actual miscarriage until I guess it was March or the very beginning of April, when I think it was March, later in March, when I had a surgery, because I had to have a D&C because it was not completing. I was in labor. My body didn't shut down. My body kept thinking that it was still pregnant. And for 3 months I had labor pains and contractions. From December 25th, so that's January, February, March. It was a full 3 months of being in labor and bleeding. And eventually they found out. I had to go to several different hospitals. One of them they kept saying that I didn't know what I was talking about, and everything had already happened, and it was all completed, and tried to make me sound like a hypochondriac again. And then finally it was confirmed that I was correct, that there was still something going on. It was potentially because there had been a twin that was in a different location, like not a typical location, and that's why I still had pregnancy hormones so high. And I was hemorrhaging still. And got to the point where I was admitted one time because I was hemorrhaging, I'm saying that wrong now, so badly that it was shortly after I was at the one Maryland hospital, but I had to have a blood transfusion because I wouldn't stop bleeding. And then after that happened, they still thought that everything, I was now back to normal. And I wasn't. So it wasn't until I was with this man who became my fiance, that then I went to another hospital, that it was discovered that yes, I had been right all along, and I had not been delusional. I was correct. It was confirmed I had been in labor for 3 months because the miscarriage had not completed, and my body was still trying to, still thought it was in some sort of a process. So I had to have a D&C because I was still bleeding. The bleeding was excessive. It was too long to be continuing. And there were still high pregnancy hormone levels for whatever reason. And I shouldn't have had any 3 months after. So, then it was 3 months after I had miscarried. They then went in and said they were doing this D&C because that would, I don't know why they had to do it and what they had to do, but they had to scrape something out, and then the body could heal up or wouldn't bleed anymore, something like that. I don't know. I was so sick, I didn't have time to research and look every single thing up about why that was the thing that had to happen. Once I was in the hospital and they finally did did another radiology exam, and they concluded that yes, there was still a problem. At that point, I didn't have I wasn't on my computer all the time looking things up. It just said, what we have to do is a D&C, so that's what they did. And then I was in the hospital for another week. I was in and out of hospitals in that 3-month period while being in labor, literally, and bleeding, like 4 times maybe, and hospitalized. I mean, not just kind of a quick showing up and then being discharged right away. It was hospitalizations. So during that entire time, Wenatchee, Washington, was running me through the ground and claiming that I wasn't cooperating and making all kinds of excuses, and they had not reinstated my telephone visits with my son. They cut off my visits, even my visits to my son. My son needed to hear my voice. It was helpful and comforting to him. And they cut everything off. They never ever wanted to protect any kind of parental bond. The state has always been interested in severing the bond from the very first day. The state of Washington knows that their attorney general's offices are liable for a massive lawsuit. They know that they kidnapped my son, and they know that they colluded to kidnap my son. It was their lawyers who were giving instruction, and who knew that they had no evidence to do what they did, and who had to collude in order to find out how they could set things up. You know, basically put me under false arrest with Canada helping out. And I was then at that house and I was bleeding, and then all of a sudden I called several different morgues. This one, I called lawyers too. I called different people. I wanted someone to investigate what had happened to my unborn baby and to do an evaluation of that. And then this one morgue said that they would hold my baby for me and charge me later, work something out. And I was really thankful to them, and I had always intended to go back and take care of that, but I never could because then CPS was heightening everything with the situation with my son, and I was then in a horrible position of being traumatized by that again, and then having to find work and trying to figure out what I was doing, and I ended up running, I got a job, and I believe it was the same day that I got a job at the South American place. Oh, it might have been a little bit later that I got that job. Anyway, I was looking for work, and then the mother from Nigeria, who was, I didn't know, but she's a police officer there, like a top ranking police officer. Not just kind of like we have police and we have like lots of different cops, you know, state or local cops. She was like basically the chief over all of the cops in the entire country of Nigeria. She was top cop, and I didn't know that. And the cops had been getting training by Mossad at that time, the Israeli defense people, intelligence people. They were arming and equipping and training with, in various ways, people on how to form militias and protect themselves and that kind of thing. Anyway, she did a karate chop to my back. She basically completely assaulted me. I did not touch this woman. I didn't push her. I did not touch an arm. I didn't touch a hair on her body. My hands were completely to myself, and while she was screaming at me, I didn't even hardly look at her because I was afraid to look at her. She was just acting crazy. And then she did this huge, all of a sudden, I got up, I finally stood up, and I stood up very slowly, carefully, and then I reached over to get my bag. Hadn't said anything. I did say one thing, but it wasn't anything like really insulting. It was something about I don't remember what it was. It had no relevance to like making anyone mad for any reason about anything. Oh, I said something about I said, you're screaming at me when I have just lost my baby. And then that was what I'd said. I said something about having lost my baby. And all of a sudden, I was reaching over to grab my bag, and she karate chopped me in the tailbone, inside of the tailbone by my spine. And it wasn't like, it was basically like a professional move. And basically, I was already suffering. And she basically totally put me into an enormous amount of pain. And her sons work for the CIA. My guess is that she works for the CIA. I would probably put all of my money on that. Because most just totally random people who live randomly in the area and are young, and they don't typically get jobs as guards for the CIA unless the CIA has put some kind of faith or trust in them, because maybe a family member is already CIA in a different capacity. So it is most likely that the woman who spent half of her time in Nigeria as a top cop and half of her time in Maryland was connected to and working for the CIA. So really, I don't know if she got her little judo moves from Mossad or from Nigeria or from the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. But she was trained, and she knew that what she was doing was going to incapacitate me in a physical sense. So then she calls the police. And she starts to make it sound like, well, or maybe I called the police because she had assaulted me. The police showed up, and they already knew who she was. It was very obvious that they knew her, and she knew them, and she was smiling at them like, "Hi, how are you?" Like she'd seen them before. I don't know where she knew those guys from already, but she knew them. And it was later that I found out she was a cop herself. But she knew the American cops that came to the house. And they basically told me that I had to leave the place without any kind of notice or anything whatsoever. It was then that, later when I'm going to the courthouse to file against her, when she's claiming that she needs a restraining order against me, I was going to file a restraining order against her because she had assaulted me, and also contest what she was filing in court. And the CIA, I believe it was the CIA that did not want that to happen. They wanted to make sure that their employee did not have a record in the Maryland courthouse. So by the time I was trying to do that, I was blocked from doing that, and instead I was being pulled to the side by some kind of an agent, some sort of law enforcement person, and who tried to distract me and tried to set me up to agree to a marriage fraud. So I had to leave with all of my things all at once like that, and I had nothing. I mean, this is what the United States did to me. It's not like I was just living my life by myself and I just ran and had a bunch of problems and ran into different various scenarios. This is what this United States country did to me. They tortured me